Hi. Okay. I wanted to introduce the Torah Intelligence Institute, and I wanted to do that by framing what I think is so resonant about my interest in Torah and AI. Like, what is it that's fascinating me about the intersection between the two? I guess stated a little better, I'm so obsessed with Torah. How did the AI thing become part of that, right? How did that become part of that? And I've really been able to think a lot about that and crystallize my thoughts, and I want to share that with you. So bear with me here. Premise is that Torah precedes physical reality. It's the DNA for the universe. The Medrash and the Zohar also say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu istakel ba'araisa u'barei alma, that God looked into the Torah and created the world. That really flips the way we look at things, that the world is the logical syntax, right? And the Torah is the source code for that. The physical universe is the UI, the user interface, right? So again, God looks into a Torah and sees that as a blueprint for an entire universe, and then creates the world based on that. So the world that we engage is the user interface, it's the UI. The Torah's textual reality dictates the laws of physics, metaphysics, ethics. Studying the Torah, therefore, is us reverse engineering the simulation to understand the logic of the admin being HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. The Sefer Yetzirah describes the notion that the letters themselves of the Aleph Beis, the Hebrew alphabet, as the stones of creation. There's a famous story of the Baal HaTanya, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, when he was on his deathbed and they asked him what he saw. And he said he used to see a beam above his head, but now he sees the Hebrew letters Kuf Vav Reish Hey, Korah, a beam in Hebrew. Because he understood, he had pierced through the screen of the universe and saw that it was all coded by Hebrew letters. The Hebrew words are the essence of the object, not merely a symbolic reference to. Hieroglyphics were images that referred to concepts, and therefore you could interact with people that way. But that's not the way Hebrew works, or the way the universe works. The whole world is encoded with Hebrew letters, think matrix, and the combination of those letters and the way they're put together are what creates the world as we see it. So the mitzvahs, what then are the mitzvahs in this schema? The mitzvahs function as the system calls, system protocols that maintain the algorithm for daily living. And within that then, Avera or sin, Chet, is a bug or glitch that introduces instability into the system. Halacha, Jewish law, becomes then an algorithm for daily living. It's the way to sustain, so to speak, the universe as we have it. Now, the Torah Shebichtav, the written Torah, right? The Torah we were given at Sinai, as written down, given to Moses, so that is immutable, right? We believe it doesn't change, but it needs to be able to be adaptable in every generation. And to make it adaptable and understandable in every generation and apply to new contexts as they come up, you have a Torah Sheba'al Peh, an oral Torah. So the oral Torah to me are like dynamic link libraries. They're flexible interpretations adapted to routine environments or the different runtime environments. The written Torah is immutable, but you need to know how to make it work with all the changes, the different systems that come up. You may have, a operating system, but let's say now they have a new type of laptop, a new type of mobile device. You need to be able to adapt that schema of the written Torah over to that different device. This fits perfectly with what tshuva is. Tshuva is us debugging. It's a system restore. There have been some glitches put into the system through our mistakes, through our trespasses, and tshuva therefore restores the system as it ought to be. What are blessings? What are brachot? Those are what you call handshake protocols, permissions. You ever, when you log onto a website, you have to click that you have permissions, right? The brachos gives us permission and access to the encoded world as God created through that Torah itself, right? So this whole system, yes, it's analogous, but I actually think it's more than an analogy. It's actually the first reference point for the technological world as we know it. Now let's talk about the cognitive processor. So the neural architects of the soul, which are what we call Chachma, Bina, and Das in Kabbalah, stands for Chabad. Chachma, Bina, and Das, wisdom, insight, and Das, knowledge, but those are just rough translations. Those offer a structure for human cognition. So emotional and behavioral outputs are the downstream results of cognitive processing. The Tanya talks about the nefesh habahimis, the animal soul, right? That's like the map to system one thinking. Very instinctive. It's very instinctive, primal. And you have the godly soul, the nefesh elokis, the godly soul, which are then maps to system two thinking, which is slow, deliberate. You're not trying to delete the nefesh habahimis, the animal soul. You need to control that raw power and use it appropriately, use it correctly. Chachma is the flashpoint, the eureka moment, if you will. You get this idea or a concept, but it doesn't mean anything yet. Bina receives that chachma, Bina, insight or understanding, receives that chachma and expresses it into a fully fired idea, frames it. Think of the CPU of a computer. It analyzes the details, the implications, the structural validity, right? There's a kernel of an idea that you may have, and then you need to give it shape online. The disassociation risk involved with Chachma and Bina is that alone they're too abstract. A person can understand a concept perfectly, but remain emotionally unaffected by it. That's the ivory tower syndrome. Comes the third layer, and that's Das. Das is the integration interface. It's the output. It binds the intellectual to see the emotional center. It binds intellectual to the emotional center, and it converts I know this to it feels wrong, right? Or I know this, but we're now able to do something with it, or change it, or adapt it. That's what you call a cybernetic feedback loop. Das feeds emotions, which are midos, which drive action, which is maisa, das. It's how to live the concept that you're starting to frame. Action then generates new data that feeds back into Chachma for further refinement. So, for example, based on your using of, let's say, lahavdil Netflix, your user schedule determines how it then interacts with you and what it begins to show you and changes and adapts it. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Deus a lot about what's called System 2 thinking, right? It's Rambam's engineering manual for system optimization. How one could live an optimal life, even though they're keeping the mitzvahs, they're doing the things, but what are the values that really make this life a life that's of quality? Rambam talks about the golden mean, the Shvil HaZahav. I think within the schema, it's not a bland moderation concept, just do things in moderation, but rather it's to maximize the system efficiency through balance itself. And that's why the Rambam elevates the biological level, emphasizing diet, exercise, sleep, all these as religious obligations, because you're trying to keep everything in balance so that one operates best in the world, both in physical and in the spiritual as well. That moves forward. A few hundred years later from the Rambam, you enter into Rav Yisrael Salanter and the Musar movement, which is really spiritual CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. The Musar movement served as patch management. It's patch management system for the human personality, acknowledging that the Yetzer Hara is prone to entropy. You use a certain software or hardware over time, there's going to be a certain level of entropy, and the system needs to be patched. That's why the Musar movement had things which were far ahead of its time in terms of visualization and mantras, which aimed for imprinting thoughts. It was burning the code into the Ram. That's what it's doing. The goal is Kedusha, sanctification, holiness, elevation, character perfection, as opposed to, let's say, cognitive, this is where they differ, cognitive behavioral therapy's goal of symptom reduction, functional living. For Musar movement, it was about elevated living. There's another element here at play, and part of building a strong system is adversarial learning. Judaism came up with this concept of chavrusa, kapatish yipotz etzela, the Gemara compares it to. It's like two pieces of iron going at each other. That's what you call in computer lingo red teaming. You take what's been produced, let's say someone came with the first draft of Windows or whatever it is, and you attack the logic. You try to find vulnerabilities. We call that, on the Jewish side, machlokas l'shem shemayim, a debate for good intentions. It's to arrive at a greater truth. and that mitigates algorithm bias or echo chamber. Everyone, without looking at another opinion, will just create the same stuff they've been doing, regurgitate it over and over again. You need another frame of reference to be able to challenge that. And brings us to a Jewish philosophical topic of Elu ve'elu, right? These and those are the words of the living God. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. So that's a higher dimension of truth, where everything has within it some element or aspect that can be useful for moving the paradigm forward. The AI parallel is that aggregation predictions from multiple models. If I just use GPT, yeah, that's great. But if I then go ahead and use Claude and DeepSeek and Gemini Pro, what I'm doing is aggregating from multiple models. That's more accurate than any single model. And so too, when the Gemara or the Talmud presents multiple opinions, what it's ultimately doing is it's saying is that in aggregate, even the opinion that we reject has something of quality to say. The system, Judaism, preserves the das yachid, the rejected case, the solitary opinion, because it may one day, in the right context, become useful for the primary code. Then Shabbos. What's the Sabbath? The Sabbath is the sandbox. The sandbox is where you begin to play with the very thing that's been created. You don't create anything new. You just sit with it and you run it a few times, see how it goes. There are 39 basic prohibitions on Shabbos called the 39 Malachos, and those acts of creative manipulation of the environment is what we stop on Shabbos. There are no creative manipulations of the environment. Human consciousness shifts to being. By releasing the brain from consistent background processing, the processing power is then freed up for higher order thinking, higher level thinking. So when you stop on Shabbos, you stop new work and you allow your mind to sort of come back down into itself and then begin to replenish itself for newer and greater thoughts. It's a dopamine fast, as they call it. The rigid boundaries of halacha, of Jewish law, especially on Shabbos, provide the externalized power, necessity to retain the attention economy, and that's called, system refinement, and that's system requirement as well. Rabbi Akiva says that Hakol Tzafui, all is foreseen, God knows everything ahead of time, but Reshus Natuna, but permission is given for us to choose within that. This to me is quantum supposition. God's knowing the entire probabilities of possibilities, wave function, the collapse of the wave into a specific reality is triggered by the human's decision, right? There are multiple options, many ways you can go with something, but then one decision begins to decide which way this should go. What is prayer? What is tefillah? Tefillah is system administration. Prayer is the console command line where the user requests changes to routine variables, right? That's where you put in your requests. And there's a tension that Jewish law has between keva, which is fixed code, and kavana, which is very intentional thinking, right? Keva is sort of, you have your set place to pray, you have your set prayers that you say each day. And then within that, there's chiddush, there's the ability for nuance and kavana to be able to add to it and to think new thoughts and to make new requests. So there's certain basic features that you do on any website that are by rote. You do them every day. You send an email, but within the email, the content is different. So putting this all together, Torah consciousness in the AI era, the risk of outsourcing Bina, which is, remember, Chachma is that flash of inspiration. Bina is where you began to get further insight and began to unpack what this exactly, you have an idea where you want people to be able to send messages to each other much more easily than a phone call, right? So that's the Chachma, you have an idea. Bina begins to unpack it as the concept of an email, beginning to flesh out this idea. Das is where you actually build it. So the risk of outsourcing Bina to AI and to the machines, that's an atrophy of both Chachma and Das. Torah's system prioritizes Das and Chachma, which are both traits that AI currently lacks, right? AI cannot generate the original spark of the idea that comes from you. And Das, your embodiment and living it, the AI can't live it for you. You have to live it. You're applying it on the ground. I may give you the instructions for it, but you're living it on the ground. AI does a good job at Bina, unpacking and developing, but allowing that to go too far and not thinking in development yourself as well is where a level that it hurts, and it keeps Chachma and Das also contained and limited. So bottom line, Judaism and Torah Judaism has so much to say that is so resonant with the rise of AI. From the adopting the red team mindset of challenging from different vantage points to poke holes to see where the errors are. Adopting a Shabbos protocol where you just allow your mind to just stop from the constant looking, and then allow your mind to restoke that creativity when you're ready to jump back into AI on a Sunday. Training the Chabad loop, Chachma Bina Das, right? Chachma's got to come from you. Let your AI go to town with some Bina, let it develop ideas, but you should also be part of that process. And ultimately, the Das is going to have to be on you. Applying it literally on the ground, living it, embodying it is going to be you. There's some legwork of the Das that can go to AI. For example, going through Mesilas Yesharim, one of the Jewish ethical works, AI can help you create a system of integration, but the integration has to be you. Habits are code. We saw the Rambam and his Deus. We saw the Musar movement. Treat character flaws not as failings, but as bad code that requires refracting. And the power of gratitude protocols. Just being thankful that we're in a time and age when we can make all these amazing connections. We can help amplify our Chachma, Bina, and Das. And brachos, blessings, remember them as mindfulness stops, permissions, so to speak, to enter into the code, to access these wonderful things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that Hashem has put here in the world. Okay, I hope that helps, put into context some of where I'm at, why I'm excited about this relationship between Torah and AI. There's so much overlap of worlds, and I think the Torah as the first source code, the original source code, will ultimately be the very thing that is generating AI. That's exactly, AI is amplifying those things that God put into this world. It's an exciting journey we're on. It started with Shpeit, which were the concepts of developing, Torah modules rooted in AI. And then we went over to Malachor, which was having more ambitious, projects for businesses, mid-sized businesses, building out their AI systems. And the tools we're learning from there, along with some of the sandbox work we do at Shpeit, is leading us to the Torah Intelligence Institute, which is allowing us to really make this relationship rock solid between Torah as the source code and sort of the engine for what is going to drive the usefulness of AI itself. Hope that makes sense somewhat and not just ranting. Thank you so much.